Happy to say Gary Breen is back with us. Gary, hello.
Hello.
Let me hit you with one quickly here.
Go on.
So, Exhibit A is Jordan Ayew's winner for Leicester, not marked on the edge of the area from a corner. Exhibit B is Bournemouth against Arsenal. Now, it's a lovely little move, near post, low ball. Clivert flicks it back to edge of area, and some Bournemouth players are blocking Arsenal defenders getting out. But still, Ryan Christie on the edge of the area is not marked at any stage. And I'm kind of thinking, under 11s, somebody's shouting on from the sideline, mark the kid on the edge of the area. What insanity is this? What am I missing?
Oh, do you know what? It drives me mad in terms, but the key element to those situations, and certainly you think about the Christie one is against 10 men. You think about United conceding a goal when they're down to 10 men from a corner. And then you think about Ayew as well, the edge of the box. And it's literally just as if these players are told where they're supposed to stand in every instance in these type of set pieces against. But if there's anything that's different, they just can't problem solve themselves. It's incredible that they have their hand held so much. And anytime you'll see it, Joe, you'll see that if there's any little bit of confusion on a set piece, notably a corner or something, you'll see so often, week in, week out, you'll see the players looking from the penalty box over to the dugout to say, he's not running where you told me he's going to be. What should I do? And you're thinking, can you please just take charge of the situation? And I keep saying this about these players, so talented, have every bit of information being given to them, but so lacking in that ability just to problem solve themselves. I was furious. I was actually doing a commentary for the United game. I've got no vested interest in Manchester United whatsoever, but I was so angry with them conceding that goal just before half time. The Ligt goes off. He's in that 6-yard zone, and he's their biggest, most physical presence in there. He goes off to have that head injury fixed. And not one of those United players thinks to go and stand in that key area. Not even Johnny Evans, who's I've got so much respect for him in terms of his career, his longevity. And he doesn't even problem solve it to the extent where he just takes a little bit of a push from Damsgaard and goes down to try and buy the free kick instead of his mindset being, I'm just going to go and head that ball. And it's so infuriating at times when you're watching.
Strange. Okay, interesting. I was hoping for a better explanation there, but if that's your sense of it, that's actually not great. It's amazing. Yeah.
It's incredible. You see it all the time. There's that inability to just like look around and assess what's happening. Now you'll have key kind of characters in your team, whether it's a goalkeeper, your Grizzly centre half, whatever it is. It could be anyone on the pitch, but they'll have to look around, and it must be their responsibility to kind of try and assess what's happening. And you're right. I'd look up at that scenario and think, well, Christie, one of the best technical players in Bournemouth's team, he's on the edge of the box on his own. This doesn't feel right. This just does not feel right. And you'd move someone in and around so if the ball does break to him. But having said that, Joe, when that corner was taken, I was just literally applauding, thinking, that is brilliant. The ball, first of all, to be that low on the delivery, the flick round the corner by Clivert, and then him to step onto that ball, left foot is finished. I mean, that was a joy. That is probably one of my favourite goals this season already.
It was quality. So we won't get through everything. We'll get through what we can. I thought it was kind of striking, by the way, just an Arsenal who can't really afford to lose ground to Man City, such is the nature of the league. You almost feel they need to be ahead coming around the final corner. So Mikel Arteta said of Saliba's sending off on 30 minutes, that from that point on it was an impossible task.
Yeah.
I didn't get the memo on this. When did it become an impossible task against Bournemouth? Whatever against City, he'll just keep the ball forever, maybe with an extra man, and it's really difficult. But Arsenal versus Bournemouth at 0-0, I don't know if I'd frame it as impossible task.
No, and I think there's actually a lot to look behind the scenes in terms of what he said there, because ultimately it wasn't just that one player got sent off, it was that Saliba got sent off. Now, if you think about that brilliant back to the wall performance to see out the result at City, and likewise at home to Brighton when Rice got sent off, it's who gets sent off. Ultimately, it's about, and Saliba is a massive loss to Arsenal. He has been, you think about 2 seasons ago when the title challenge just collapsed when he wasn't there. I think this will be a massive loss for Arsenal in terms of what he gives them, because he gives them that presence. And you can think about key performers that for any of the great teams, if they were to come out of the team, think about Roy Keane coming out of that United team, they weren't quite the same. And yet they had world-class players all over the pitch. So it is interesting. I think the recruitment now suggests with the likes of Timber coming in this season, I know he's been there a year, but he had that injury. So he's there as an extra defender. Calafiori as well. So I think Arteta will be looking at this and thinking, right, I've got players of quality now to come in. He didn't have that on Saturday because Kivior comes in, and I don't think he's at that level in terms of being able to have that physical presence back there. But it'll be interesting to see how they cope without him, and notably Gabriel, who's been so impressive for Arsenal. But when he hasn't got Saliba alongside him, and that is the concern, is that in that game, Bournemouth opened up Arsenal at will. And that will be the real worry, is that it's not necessarily that you're down to 10 men. It's who that man and what that player means to your team when he gets sent off.
Okay. I'll come back to United in a second, and Liverpool, Chelsea. Just on City's win, given Arsenal's loss, it felt particularly significant. So Bernardo Silva has a little kind of scooch into Jose Sa, and Chris Kavanagh.
That's a good way of describing it.
Chris Kavanagh deems he had just vacated the area just in time that once header goes to Stones, you're not actually interfering anymore. So Gary O'Neill's asked about this, and he's talking about the bias that the big teams tend to get. There's no chance, he says, that people are purposely against Wolves. I am not saying that, he says, just to avoid full paranoia. But is there something subconscious around decision-making that without even knowing it, you are more likely to give it to City than Wolves? My focus and my senses are heightened when I'm facing Man City and Pep and Erling Haaland. Are officials not the same when it's Haaland and when it's City? Is there something there that influences decision-making? They are human. I might be miles off, but if I had to upset someone in a street and there was a little guy and a big guy, I'm upsetting a little guy, and that's nothing against little guys. You would have had the experience of playing in hundreds of professional matches and getting a feel for referees and how it tends to go. This is always a complicated question because, you know, in the main, you're going to be under more pressure against bigger teams, and you're more likely, therefore, to give away frees and give away penalties. And it's sometimes hard to differentiate, well, what's a referee affecting a flow and what's the better team affecting a flow. But did you feel on days at Old Trafford and Anfield and big teams that there was an extra something with the referees?
Well, at Old Trafford, United didn't really need the referees' help to get the better of my teams, unfortunately. But yeah, I do remember, not necessarily say decisions, but what you did sense when I was playing back then was the referees, how they would converse with the bigger teams. Like, it'll be like, oh, Bex, be careful there, or Roy, no, Roy. And then, do you remember that scene where there's about 10 United players chasing that referee?
Andy D'Urso.
And they're like, bullying, and they're like spitting as they're talking to him, and he's like, calm down, lads, calm down. And then the next tackle that comes in from the opposition player, he literally gets up and goes, ref, and he went, book, you're booked, don't talk to me like that. And it was that type of scenario that you would feel that a lot of referees liked kind of like being on first name terms with some of those big stars. And, you know, I felt at times that he got affected by that. And if I was invariably captain of the visiting team, I'd be saying to the ref, come on, listen, they're not your mates. Don't try and be their mates. Do you know what I mean? Just give the decisions. But I think ultimately it feels that way. Gary O'Neill's literally walked, I don't know what he was saying, where he was going with it all, saying, listen, I've got nothing against little guys and all this. And I'm not saying anything, but I am actually saying something. And I'm not saying they're very honest, but subconsciously, and you're thinking, I don't know where he's going with it. But I can understand the frustration, because if you look back even last year, they've had some terrible decisions go against them. But that wasn't one. That absolutely wasn't one. And the skill set of scenarios like that was what Silva does, is that he messes the goalkeeper about. And I know there's been a new change of rule that you can't do it, but it's how quickly you detach from the goalkeeper. Now, if we're marking at corners and stuff, I have no problems with grappling. I would be holding on to people all the time. But you've got to learn when to let go so it doesn't look so obvious. And it's all about timing. Silva got it done perfectly. He wasn't impeding the goalkeeper in terms of his sight. They just didn't defend the corner well enough, and they got punished.
And so if Bex was Bex, were you Gaz, no?
No, I was just probably Breen or something. That was it. Or shut up, you. Probably that one, yeah.
I dare say Gary O'Neill's right. It's a tricky situation. But I agree with you. I don't think it was the wrong decision in yesterday's instance. So we mentioned you did the Manchester United game on Premier Sports on the Saturday. First half, that was starting to feel like an increasingly familiar day.
Listen, it does, and it's so at times. It's saying to you there, it's so difficult to commentate on Manchester United at the moment because you feel like you're just repeating yourself, that certain scenarios are happening, and going into the game, it was a big one, bearing in mind Brentford had played particularly well the week before. I'd identified in my mind that their midfield three had real energy, especially with their captain Damsgaard coming back into there. And then the team sheet comes in and they've gone Casemiro, Eriksen and Bruno. For all their skill sets, they lack athleticism. And at times they did find it difficult in that first half. Brentford played okay. I fully expected Brentford to come out in the second half and chase the result. But even as Thomas Frank said, they were so poor, Brentford, in the second half. And that's not to take credit away from United, because they came out of the blocks with that fantastic goal from Garnacho, who was so impressive on the day. And it does kind of like open up the line of, or the chain of thought, is that if Garnacho is going to play in that his preferred left-hand side position, and Rashford will get pushed out to the right, where he doesn't operate as well. I know he put in a brilliant cross for that goal, and there were moments, but I gave a lot of character in terms of United coming out in that second half, bearing in mind the pressure that would have been on the manager. It had been so intense had they lost that home game. But you just feel that with every time they kind of make one step forward, they're going to make two back. And I think it's a massive challenge for them again up against Jose Mourinho's Fenerbahce team on Thursday evening. And this is the problem that we have with United, is that I don't think any of those Manchester United players, you've got to be a very good player to be signed by Manchester United. But you've got to be a brilliant one to stay there, because you have to be consistently brilliant. And I don't think enough of them players are. And that's the problem that the manager will always have, is that, you know, one week they'll be good and there'll be moments of individual brilliance that won them the game on Saturday. And it was great to see Hojlund get his goal, because I genuinely believe that if he got service, and we talked about Bex and Ryan Giggs on the other side, when you're playing up against that United team, crosses and balls and were coming in all the time from Scholes, from behind, from Keane, constant service into those brilliant centre forwards that United have. He doesn't get anywhere near that, because the wingers like Garnacho, Rashford and Bruno, all they're interested in is shooting on goal themselves.
Well, speaking of shooting, Bruno, I was just checking stats out of interest.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So that COVID season where he was really phenomenal, he scored 18 goals that year in the league. But since then it's kind of an 8 goals, 10 goals territory, give or take. This season so far, 8 games, no goals, 23 shots.
Yeah, the most in the Premier League. It's remarkable, because, and it's something that kind of extended a little bit to the Portuguese team. Scotland got that brilliant 0-0 result. But Bruno was getting into positions and he was getting his strikes off, and it just wasn't happening. And Joe, do you remember when he actually first came, Bruno Fernandes? It was incredible. I think it was something like 40 goals in his first 80 games. And straight away the comparisons are, oh God, he's better than Scholes. He must be better than Scholes. And I don't think anything, that kind of goal return is sustainable. It can't be, but it's been a real drop off for him, and you can hear his frustrations. He don't shy away from it. He literally says, "It's my responsibility to score the goals for Manchester United, and I'm not doing it." So I just find it remarkable that it has lasted as long as it has.
For people who didn't see the game, Martinez filled in at left back. Evans, you know, and again, even just the Evans thing. Okay, he has a good game, so now he's starting. It's this kind of endlessly swapping around for the right kind of jigsaw puzzle pieces. So he was in. De Ligt was with him. Now, De Ligt had a bad moment a couple of weeks ago for the Van de Ven run against Spurs. Lots of defenders like yourself would have felt he was in a bad starting position and didn't react well enough. And there was kind of a, well, let's see where this guy's at. Generally,
I've got a theory on that though, Joe, in terms of that, because Van de Ven runs the length of the pitch and we're all looking at him thinking, come over and fill the gap. But I've been watching United recently now, and defenders don't leave their zones.
Okay.
If it's my channel on there, they stay there, and they literally are saying to their teammate, "That's your problem. You deal with it." And I genuinely think that's coming from Ten Hag. I believe that. I'm noticing it, that people are not leaving their slots to cover.
Right.
And I think that's an extension from coming from the Eredivisie, where you're manager of the best team, Ajax, and it's kind of like playing lesser oppositions where you think they're not going to punish you, but they do punish you in the Premier League. And I generally am looking at thinking, they're being told to do this, these defenders.
Right, interesting. Well, that maybe explains that moment a bit more in his favour, but generally considered to have been pretty good at the weekend.
Yeah, he was. And I think he kind of enjoyed the kind of physical battle that Brentford would normally ask of you. And Mbeumo, who's been fantastic for Brentford, wasn't particularly good at the weekend. I'm not sure why. I wouldn't necessarily say it was because of Martinez playing at left back against him. He just had one of those games where nothing was coming off for him. Sharda was at the point who's so quick normally, but just wasn't running past De Ligt. Normally you would have feared for him, but he defended really well, actually. Got his body there. It was the type of game he enjoyed. And I think My kind of initial observation, because I'd have seen him a lot in his development. I'd seen him come into the team as a young kid at Ajax, and I'd have been covering a lot of Eredivisie games at the time. And I could see his skill set, but I did often wonder, in terms of where he would go. I felt the move to Juventus would be a good one because it's a particularly slower game there. And of course, then he goes to Bayern Munich, doesn't quite work out like it didn't in Italy for him. And then suddenly he comes to United and you're thinking, is this a big upgrade on Maguire? I'm not convinced, but he is showing a little bit of an improvement now because ultimately we're not judging him by any other standards. If you go to Manchester United, usually you're considered to be one of the best around, or maybe because of their reduced status, that bar has dropped a little bit, but it's not one of those signings that I immediately thought, oh, wow, that's exactly what they need. And it was the type of signing where I thought, oh, hold on a minute, you've got this new hierarchy at United. They're supposed to be transfer gurus in terms of Dan Ashworth and all these type of guys, Wilcox, in terms of making sure they buy the right players. And yet it was another player, another former player of Ten Hag's, which of that 600 million he spent, I think it's something like 40% of those players have played under him. And I'm not convinced, that having seen Eredivisie as much as I have, that there's many players who can come out of that league and succeed in the Premier League.
And just the last one on that game, how did Nathan Collins go, Gary?
Yeah, he was good. Couple of examples where he was faced up in the box by Rashford and he worked his body well, got the block on. He looked far more comfortable in that Brentford shirt than he possibly has done. Well, not necessarily that second game for Arne, but certainly that first one than he has done. I think that's probably because that's a well-drilled team. They know exactly what they're doing. They didn't perform to their usual levels, Brentford at the weekend, to their manager's frustration. But I think as a centre-half, if you know that the team knows exactly what each one's role is, you can perform far better. And I think he's still learning that with Ireland in terms of what Heimer's trying to build.
Okay. Anfield yesterday, it was generally framed in some respects as Liverpool have made an excellent start to the season under Slot, and now we've got some tests. Let's see really where they are. Arsenal next week and Chelsea yesterday. So that's test one passed. Like, it was an interesting game in that first 30 minutes, Andy Robertson was having a difficult time against Madueke. Chelsea seemed to settle very well, very nice on the eye in possession. Lavia in midfield looks like a lovely player, and it was like, oh right, this is a game. And then goal happens. Chelsea do equalise. Second goal happens almost straight away, and they kind of managed it out very well. Liverpool. You wouldn't say it was an awesome performance, but against very decent opposition, there was nothing wrong with it either. Would that be right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think when you think of an awesome performance, you immediately think of a Jurgen Klopp performance, Liverpool team, and this was functional. It was controlled. Didn't get overly embarrassed by the fact that Chelsea were having a lot of ball as the away team. They had a way of playing, and I've been so impressed with Slot. And we're talking about the pressures that Ten Hag's under, but ultimately, what Dutch managers, they're so famous across the world, but they've really struggled. There haven't been many who've done particularly well in the Premier League for all their success elsewhere. But I think he's going to do well. I know he has started brilliantly, and everyone's saying it's still very early days, but there's something about him in terms of his personality, in terms of the fact that he's looked at the scenario at Liverpool and not necessarily said, listen, buy me this player, buy me that player. He's looked at the players he's got and thought, I've inherited a brilliant squad here. I'm happy with it. And then you see the emergence of the likes of Curtis Jones yesterday, in terms of how influential he was, given the fact that he had the remit of looking after Palmer, who's the most talked about player at the moment, down well, and then was such a threat going forward, got one penalty, possibly should have had two, got the goal. So impressive. And then behind him, or dovetailing with him, Gravenberch as well, where we initially thought last year, well, what is he? Can he play that sixth role? Can he play on the half turn? Well, he certainly can play on the half turn in this way of playing. I've been so impressed with him. And it is, you have to kind of give yourself constant reminders to say, let a player play regularly, and the trajectory of his form then will be massive. And we've seen that with him. And if you think about that Slot in terms of what he's doing, there's just an understanding sometimes, well, most of the time with Dutch managers, I know it's a stereotype, but it's their way or the highway. But he's just sitting back, and he's got that. He reminds me a little bit of Gus Hiddink in terms of how well he did at Chelsea, and of course Martin Jol as well at Tottenham and Fulham. That they had an understanding of what the Premier League is about. This manager seems to have learned very quickly. Yeah,
it's so interesting that, because on paper there are Liverpool players that you just know would get chewed up with other clubs. So take Take Jones. Like look at Ugarte at United. Thrown in for a game, thrown to the Wolves, taken out, confident shot. Casemiro goes back in. In another 2 weeks, Casemiro will have a disaster. Then it'll be like, right, Ugarte, back you go in. He'll have another nightmare, or maybe 2-3 games, okay, nightmare, back it. And give it 2 years' time, he'll be turfed out of the club and people will say he wasn't very good. But I suspect if he went to Liverpool, they'd find a way to nurse him and get the best out of him. And it's a remarkably well-run club on that front at the moment.
No, it is. I totally agree with what you say there, because I was having Dave McIntyre was on a commentary with me, and he was saying we were having this argument before we went on air about the likes of Jones and stuff, and how many teams would he get in? But I'll tell you what, he's got a real opportunity now, and this may well change Slot's mind in terms of thinking, does he need that to find that extra midfielder that he was looking for in the summer? The emergence of Jones, and of course, there's a lot of pressure on a young player like that to go from being a good young player in the squad at Liverpool to being someone who really nails down one of those starting 11 positions. But he was so impressive yesterday in terms of what he gave them, the energy. And even his interview afterwards, he was saying, when you play centre midfield for Liverpool now, I've got to do my defensive work, which he did. I mean, there was an unbelievable challenge in the box on Palmer to stop a certain goal. Yeah. He said, but then you've got to get forward and help. And you're thinking, and it was interesting because you're thinking, that's what centre midfielders used to always do, and maybe he's a throwback to that, but it's so impressive.
It's so sorry,
Joe. And they're not the only one. You always look at a manager in terms of can you make the players that you inherit better. Konate looks so much better as well at centre back. Right. It's not a criticism of Klopp, but it's just showing you what this manager's doing. I've been so impressed with him.
Sorry to jump in there. It's so interesting what you're saying, because just before you came on, I was talking about Jones, and so he runs in behind to win the penalty. He runs in behind for the goal, and just because it was Liverpool, I just thought, and you would have an experience of it, like someone like Steven Gerrard, and not everybody had his power and his athleticism, but I mean, he would just break games up just by saying, I'm going to run in behind the defence 15 times today. And that it's amazing. It's a gift if a midfielder can do it. Obviously, the physical demands to do it are phenomenal, but you're right, you don't see it very often.
No, and like, you're talking about probably one of the most iconic Liverpool midfielders, but another one who was so successful at Liverpool and played with me at Coventry, Gary McAllister, the same. Could do that kind of break-up role in front of but then burst forward or run in behind the centre forward, dovetail brilliantly with Robbie Keane when they were both playing together with me at Coventry. And then he goes to Liverpool, and it is so impressive as well. I don't know what he was at the time, with probably nearly 40 years of age, but it just shows you it's not necessarily about energy and stuff like that. It's about that desire to run and to read the game. And he was very impressive.
Because for you as a defender, I know Reece James maybe tried to play offside instead of going with the run, which in hindsight he might have done. But for you as a defender, when that late run from Jones comes and you're on your heels just because you've no momentum, if he times that late run like that, you're dead. Like you can't do anything really.
No, that's the thing. We've had this conversation so often, in it, like about pace is overrated, but it's about timing. It's ultimately about that. Is that if you give someone who could be way slower than you as a runner, if you give him a head start, you're not really going to catch him up, and that's what it's about. The timings of the runs, and I don't know. I just look at Liverpool, and I know everyone said it was a nice kind of fixture list for him to begin with, and of course that shock result at home to Forest where they lost. We covered that game on Premier Sports, and you suddenly thought, this could be a tricky one for you now. That the mood may well turn, but the response since then has been brilliant. I mean, they destroyed Milan in the Champions League, but I've been really impressed with them, and that will be a really interesting game now up against Arsenal next week. Yeah,
minus Saliba, of course, as well, which is interesting. Chelsea, Gary.
Yeah, no, it's weird because you often at the beginning of the season you may well cover a lot of teams, and as we were both saying prior to this, I hadn't seen that much of Chelsea. And I've got all my neighbours where I live, all Chelsea, and they're like telling me this. And you're obviously seeing from something looking from afar in terms of the chaotic nature of that transfer policy and the players that are leaving to replaced by other ones. But in terms of how they've done, I've been impressed with their manager, what he's done. He's led with real authority, and he's made decisions, and certain players are coming in and going out, and not scared to make big changes in terms of like get him off, get the next guys on. So it remains to be seen whether or not they can force their way into that top four.
Just one before you go, I feel in a sense, I don't. If I frame this wrongly, it's going to sound ridiculous. Everybody obviously knows that Robert Lewandowski is an extraordinary player. One of the great strikers of the last 20 years. He's 36 now. Just at the weekend for Barcelona, he scored, and that meant he's now third outright on the all-time list of goal scorers in Europe's Big Five leagues. So he's third on the all-time list. Obviously, Ronaldo and Messi are ahead of him. So in some respects, this guy should have won a Ballon d'Or once, if not twice. The 2020 edition was cancelled. Messi got it in 21 in the same year that he had scored 41 goals in a league season, Lewandowski. Top Bundesliga scorer 7 times. Only him and Gerd Muller have managed that. And yet, I don't know. I think if you said to people, name the great forward attacking players of the last 20 years, they'd get to him eventually. But I don't know, is that like I can't help but think 300 of your goals came in the Bundesliga. And I'm not saying the Bundesliga is terrible, but like Harry Kane's just scored his 6th hat-trick. I don't know, like Lewandowski. I'm not even sure what the question is, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's strange. I think anyone who's listening will probably agree with you. I think as soon as you see the numbers and the stats, he instantly gets your respect and stuff like that. But if you think about a Lewandowski goal, you don't think about him dropping a shoulder, beating 2 players, like running in behind. You know, you just think of him more as a throwback to that really quintessential number 9 where ball comes in a box, he just finishes, one-touch goal. And of course, we do look on the other leagues as such. And, you know, if he's playing, he got a lot of goals at Dortmund, but if he's playing for the powerhouses in the German league, you know that he's going to create so many chances and he's going to score them, as Harry Kane's proving now. But I think probably the main one is that you never seem to feel that he has a massive tournament with his national team. Yeah. I know he's an iconic player for them, but you know, like even with Ronaldo leading his Portugal team to that European title and Messi World Cup and things like that. And
there's a moment.
There's that one moment at international level, which, listen, you're not ever like dismissing what he's done. But I agree with you. Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't like to play against him.
This is the thing. He's also like he's sitting at home right now, going, "Listen to you, pair of absolute, you know what?
I know.
Exactly. I've scored over 80 goals for Poland."
Yeah, but it's the company we're judging him, because you're talking about the two greatest players we've ever seen, Messi and Ronaldo, and he's just tucked in behind them. No shame in that. He's a wonderful centre forward, and what he's doing was incredible. More than anything, is the longevity that he's playing at this age and at this level still. Scoring goals. He's a brilliant player.
Yeah, and yet again, I think you ask people, give me the top 5 of the last 20 years. I'd say a lot of people forget about him. Maybe it's a kind of Anglo football focus as well. Brilliant stuff. We'll talk next week. Gary Breen, thanks a mil.
Thanks, Joe. Good luck, mate.